Thank you. It's a very expansive challenge. Two-part answer. One of the things you worked into that was, nations can't even defend themselves without nuclear weapons, let alone without armies and these young men, in most cases, who've become soldiers and fought. 190 nations today seem to defend themselves without nuclear weapons, seem to have concluded that they can live in the anarchic world that does exist today in 2014 without nuclear weapons. So it's certainly not impossible. This may seem a little out of left field, but one example I often give is South America. I don't know much about the geopolitics of South America, but one thing I do know is that there's big countries and there's little countries. Brazil and Argentina are not just big in landmass, but a lot of people, pretty good economic muscle, and the Uruguays and the Paraguays could easily feel threatened by the Brazil and Argentina and say the only way we can defend ourselves against this big behemoth who's right next door on our border is to come up with nuclear weapons. And I don't know exactly why they haven't, but I do know they haven't. For 69 years now, they've said we can figure out a way to coexist. So I think it's kind of ridiculous for anyone to claim, it's impossible for a nation to protect itself without nuclear weapons. But that was just one small comment that you made, because the main thing, here's how I'd like to answer your question. I cheated a little bit when I read Shelley. I read that quote by Shelley, and I guess I could get my computer out, but what was it? That man should not, I'm going to paraphrase, man should not kill his brother, and it doesn't make any difference if you're in uniform. That just adds the crime of servitude to the sin of murder. I think it's a little unfair of Shelley to say that about today's world, because that's not the world we live in. I don't think that a man about your age, or it could be a woman who's joined the U.S. Army and actually killed someone on a battlefield, is in fact a murderer. But I think what I and Shelley want to suggest is that someday the human race can make it so that, as you heard me say today, thou shalt not kill really does mean thou shalt not kill. It seems to me that if there's anyone who really ought to embrace the notion that someday we ought to at least aspire to a world without soldiers, it's people who've been soldiers, let alone people who've been in the horror of combat. I would invite you to, since this was your question, to approach your military friends and say, the pretty awful things that you experienced and pretty awful things that you are forced to do by the world we live in today. Join us in trying to imagine a world without war, and even a world where, yes, there would be police, yes, there would be the use of force in order to enforce the law, but the notion, and you've heard me say it several times today, that this group of humans has to arm itself against that group of humans 50, 500, 5,000 years into the future. I would hope that soldiers would be on the front lines of saying the human race is better than that, and we have more potential to live in a single, unified human community, and truly something we can call one world.